When Natalie Brooks discovered she was pregnant, she believed her life was finally falling into place. She was 26 years old, newly married, and living with her husband, Ethan, in a modest apartment in Chicago. They didn't have much money. Their furniture was secondhand. Their car was old. They were still paying off student loans, and Ethan worked long hours at a construction company. But they were happy, and now they were going to have a baby. One rainy Saturday morning, Natalie stood in their tiny kitchen holding the pregnancy test. She had already taken 3 tests, all positive. Ethan walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. He stopped when he saw her expression. What happened? Natalie slowly held up the test. Ethan stared at it. Then his face changed. Are you serious? Natalie nodded. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan laughed. He put the coffee down and hugged her. We're going to be parents. Natalie laughed through tears. I think we're having a girl. You don't know that. I know. Ethan smiled. What would you name her? Natalie placed one hand gently over her stomach. Maybe Grace. Grace. Grace Brooks. Ethan repeated the name. I like it. That evening they called their families. Ethan's parents were thrilled. Natalie's family reacted differently. Her father, Charles Brooks, was a wealthy businessman who had spent decades building Brooks International, a large property development company. Her mother, Diane, cared deeply about appearances. Her older brother, Adrian, was already working inside the family business. Natalie had grown up surrounded by wealth, but she had never felt like she belonged in that world. Charles believed money created responsibility. Diane believed reputation was everything. Adrian believed the family business belonged to him. Natalie had always been the odd one out. She had chosen a career in education instead of joining the company. She had married Ethan, whom her father considered ordinary, and now she was pregnant. When Natalie called her mother, she expected excitement. Instead, Diane went silent. You're pregnant? Yes. How far along? Almost 8 weeks. Another silence. Then Diane asked, Have you told your father? Not yet. You should come home. Natalie frowned. Why? Your father wants to speak with you. The next afternoon, Natalie and Ethan drove to the Brooks estate. The enormous house sat behind iron gates on several acres of land. Natalie hadn't visited in months. As soon as she entered, she noticed that her mother wasn't smiling. Her father was waiting in his office. Adrian was there too. Natalie immediately felt uncomfortable. What's going on? Charles motioned toward a chair. Sit down. Natalie sat. Ethan remained standing. Charles looked at him. You can sit too. Ethan took the chair beside Natalie. Charles folded his hands. Your mother tells me you're pregnant. Natalie smiled. Yes. I assume this was planned. Natalie's smile disappeared. What does that mean? It means I want to know whether you have considered what you're doing. Ethan looked at Charles. We're going to raise our child. Charles ignored him. Natalie, you're 26. You have no serious savings. Your husband works a regular job. You're living in a small apartment. We're doing fine. Fine isn't good enough. Natalie stared at her father. What exactly are you suggesting? Charles looked at Adrian. Adrian placed a folder on the desk. Natalie opened it. Inside were financial statements about her and Ethan. She looked shocked. Why do you have this? We're family. That's not an answer. Adrian spoke. Father is concerned about the baby's future. Our baby is not a business project. Diane entered the room. She sat beside Charles. Nobody is trying to hurt you. Natalie looked at her. Then why did you investigate our finances? Her mother didn't answer. Charles leaned back. We have an opportunity to solve this before the baby is born. Natalie felt uneasy. What opportunity? We establish a family trust. Fine. The trust would cover the child's education, medical expenses, housing, and future. Natalie nodded. That sounds generous. It comes with conditions. Her smile disappeared. What conditions? Charles looked directly at her. The child would spend the majority of her time with the family. Natalie stared at him. No. Listen. No. You haven't even heard the proposal. I've heard enough. Adrian leaned forward. You don't understand what you're doing. Natalie stood. I understand perfectly. Charles's voice hardened. You are making an emotional decision. I'm making a decision about my child. Ethan stood beside her. We should leave. Charles looked at Ethan. This concerns my family. Ethan answered calmly. It concerns Natalie and me. Charles's expression became cold. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can provide everything this child needs. Natalie took Ethan's hand. We don't need everything. She looked at her father. We just need each other. They walked out. Natalie thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next several weeks, strange things began happening. Ethan's hours at work were reduced. Then his supervisor suddenly became distant. One afternoon, Ethan came home early. He looked worried. I lost my position. Natalie froze. What? They said the project was ending. But you told me it was supposed to continue for another 6 months. I know. Natalie stared at him. Did my father do this? I don't know. But deep down, she suspected the answer. Then Natalie received a call from her bank. Someone had attempted to access her financial information. Her mother called constantly. Her brother sent messages. Every conversation returned to the same subject. The baby, the trust, the family. One evening, Adrian arrived at their apartment without warning. Natalie opened the door. What are you doing here? We need to talk. No, just 5 minutes. Natalie stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Adrian lowered his voice. Father is serious. So am I. He wants the baby to be raised in the family environment. That's not his decision. You should think about what happens if you refuse. Natalie stared at him. Is that a threat? Adrian shook his head. It's advice. Then here's mine. Stay away from my family. Adrian looked at her stomach. You'll regret making this difficult. Natalie closed the door. For the first time, she became afraid. Not for herself. For her baby. The pregnancy became increasingly difficult. Natalie tried to stay calm. She attended medical appointments. She prepared the nursery. She and Ethan bought a tiny crib. They painted one wall pale blue. They placed a framed ultrasound photograph above it. Their daughter was becoming real. And every night, Natalie whispered to her unborn child, "You're safe." She wanted to believe it. Then, at 7 months pregnant, Natalie received a letter. It came from a lawyer representing her father. She opened it at the kitchen table. Her hands began shaking. The letter claimed that Charles was concerned about her ability to provide a stable environment for the child. Natalie read it twice. Then she started crying. Ethan sat beside her. This isn't happening. It is. We'll fight it. Natalie looked at him. How? We'll find a lawyer. We don't have the money. I'll figure it out. But Charles had already moved faster. Within days, Natalie received another notice. Her father was seeking temporary guardianship arrangements. He claimed Natalie was financially unstable. He cited Ethan's job loss. He cited their apartment. He cited medical concerns. Every weakness had been turned into evidence. Natalie couldn't believe it. The person who had created many of those problems was now using them against her. She called her mother. Why are you doing this? Diane began crying. We're trying to protect you. You're trying to take my baby. Your father thinks it's best. Do you? Silence. Natalie whispered. Do you really believe I'm incapable of being a mother? Her mother didn't answer. That hurt more than anything. A few weeks later, Natalie went into labor. It was earlier than expected. Ethan rushed her to the hospital. The night was long and frightening. Finally, just before sunrise, the baby was born. A beautiful little girl. Natalie held her against her chest. She cried. Ethan stood beside the bed with tears in his eyes. Grace, Natalie whispered. Our Grace. For a few hours, everything felt peaceful. Then Diane arrived. She wasn't alone. Two lawyers stood behind her. Natalie's heart sank. "Mom!" Diane approached slowly. "How are you?" Natalie tightened her arms around the baby. "Fine." Diane looked at Grace. "She's beautiful." "Thank you. We need to talk." "Not now. Your father has made arrangements." Natalie shook her head. "No. You haven't heard everything." "I don't need to." One lawyer stepped forward. "We need you to review these documents." Natalie looked at the papers. "Get out." The lawyer stopped. Diane's voice trembled. "Natalie, please. You came here to take my baby?" "No." "Then why are there lawyers?" Diane looked away. Natalie understood. Her family had planned this before Grace was even born. She refused to sign anything. Ethan contacted a lawyer, but their options were limited. The legal battle became complicated. Charles had resources. Natalie didn't. He hired experienced attorneys. He presented financial documents. He brought witnesses who questioned the stability of Natalie and Ethan's home. None of them said Natalie didn't love her child. Instead, they made her look inexperienced, unprepared, vulnerable. Every accusation was technically small. Together, they became overwhelming. Then Ethan made a terrible discovery. The company where he had worked had received pressure from one of Charles's business partners. That pressure had contributed to Ethan losing his job. Natalie was furious, but proving it was another matter. One evening, Ethan sat across from her. "I don't know how we're going to win." Natalie looked at Grace sleeping in the crib. "We can't lose." "I know. What if we do?" Ethan couldn't answer. Natalie picked up her daughter. "I won't let them take her." The legal pressure continued. Finally, Charles offered a compromise. He proposed that Grace stay temporarily with the Brooks family while Natalie and Ethan stabilized. Natalie refused. Then the lawyers warned her that refusing could make the court believe she wasn't cooperating. She felt trapped. Every choice seemed designed to hurt her. Eventually, under immense pressure, Natalie signed an agreement granting the family temporary guardianship. She was told it would last only a few months. She believed she would get Grace back. She was wrong. The temporary arrangement became permanent in practice. Visits were restricted. Phone calls were monitored. Every disagreement became evidence against Natalie. 6 months passed. Then a year. Grace was growing up in the Brooks estate. Natalie saw less and less of her. Then one day, she was told that Grace should remain with the family because she had adapted. Natalie couldn't breathe. The word echoed in her mind. Adapted. As though a child could simply adapt to losing her mother. Natalie fought. But she was exhausted. Her marriage was collapsing under the pressure. Ethan blamed himself. Natalie blamed everyone. One night, Ethan packed a bag. Natalie watched him. "Where are you going?" "I don't know." "You're leaving." "I can't keep watching you suffer." "So you leave me alone?" "I don't know what else to do." Natalie cried. "You promised." "I know." He left. Natalie sat alone in the apartment. The crib was empty. The nursery was silent. Her wedding photograph was still hanging on the wall. Everything she had dreamed about was gone. But she still had one thing. Promise. She would return for Grace. Natalie left the city. She moved to Denver with almost no money. She rented a tiny room. She found work at a shipping company. For the first year, she worked constantly. Then she enrolled in evening business courses. She learned accounting, logistics, contract management, negotiation, corporate finance. She learned the very language her family had once used to intimidate her. Every time she felt like giving up, she looked at an old photograph of Grace, and she kept going. 3 years later, Natalie opened a small logistics company. She had one delivery truck, one employee, and a rented office. Her first year was difficult. Her second year was better. By the 4th year, she had 20 trucks. By the 6th, she had contracts across several states. Natalie became successful, but she didn't become arrogant. She remembered where she had started. She remembered what it felt like to have no power. She also remembered Grace. Every year, Natalie tried to learn more about her daughter. She discovered that Grace was doing well. She was now 9 years old. She loved books. She played piano. She had grown up believing her mother had abandoned her. That knowledge broke Natalie's heart. She wanted to explain, but she knew that appearing suddenly could confuse Grace. So she waited, until the day she received an unexpected phone call. It was from an old family attorney. "I thought you should know." "Know what?" "The Brooks Group is in trouble." Natalie went silent. "How bad?" "Very bad." The company had accumulated massive debt. Several major investments had failed. Adrian had made a series of poor decisions. Charles was older and had stepped back. Diane was dealing with family problems. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was beginning to collapse. Natalie asked, "Why are you telling me?" The lawyer hesitated. "Because they're looking for investors." Natalie understood. They needed money. For the first time in years, she had it. But Natalie didn't want revenge based on anger. She wanted the truth. She hired investigators. They uncovered old documents, emails, financial transfers, messages between Adrian and the family's lawyers. One message stopped Natalie cold. It had been written before Grace was born. It discussed how to separate Natalie from her child. Another message discussed Ethan's employment. Another discussed how to portray Natalie as financially unstable. Natalie read the documents again. Her hands were shaking. They hadn't made mistakes. They had planned it. For years, Natalie had wondered whether she had failed. Now she knew. She hadn't. She had been betrayed. Natalie closed the file. Then she made a phone call. "I want to acquire their largest outstanding debt." Her financial advisor paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "You understand what that means?" Natalie smiled faintly. "I understand exactly." Over the next few months, Natalie quietly bought several assets connected to the Brooks Group. Nobody knew who was behind the acquisitions, until the annual Brooks Foundation Gala. It was the biggest event the family hosted each year. Hundreds of wealthy guests attended. Reporters were present. Business leaders filled the ballroom. Charles stood near the stage. Adrian was speaking with investors. Diane greeted guests. Then the doors opened. Natalie walked inside. The room became strangely quiet. Adrian turned. His face went pale. "Natalie." Charles looked toward the entrance. For a moment he didn't recognize her. Then he did. His expression changed completely. Diane covered her mouth. Natalie walked toward them calmly. She was wearing an elegant dark blue dress. Her hair was styled simply. She looked confident, successful, untouchable. Charles whispered, "You came back." Natalie stopped several feet away. "I said I would." Adrian stepped forward. "What do you want?" Natalie smiled. "You already know." Adrian's face tightened. "The acquisition." "Yes. That was you. Every part of it." Charles looked at her. "Why?" Natalie answered, "Because I wanted to see whether you would recognize the woman you created." Nobody spoke. Then Natalie placed a folder on the table. "Everything is here." Adrian opened it. His face changed. "What is this?" "Evidence." Diane looked at the documents. Her hands began shaking. Natalie continued, "You took my daughter." Charles stared at her. "We were protecting her." "No. You weren't prepared. You made sure I wasn't prepared." Charles didn't respond. "You interfered with Ethan's job." Adrian looked away. "You used our finances against us." Silence. "You manipulated the guardianship agreement." Diane began crying. Natalie looked at her mother. "You knew." Diane whispered, "I was afraid of your father." Natalie nodded. "So was I." Then she heard a voice behind her. "Mom." Natalie froze. She turned. Grace was standing near the entrance. She was now 10 years old. She looked at Natalie with confusion. Diane immediately moved toward her. But Grace didn't look at Diane. She looked at Natalie. "Who are you?" Natalie couldn't speak for a moment. Then she answered softly, "My name is Natalie." Grace stared at her. "Why do you look familiar?" Natalie smiled sadly. Because I have your eyes. Grace frowned. Diane stepped forward. Come with me. Grace didn't move. She looked at Charles. Grandpa. Charles couldn't answer. Grace looked back at Natalie. Do I know you? Natalie's eyes filled with tears. You knew me before you could remember. Grace looked confused. Natalie took a small photograph from her handbag. It showed Grace as a newborn. Natalie was holding her. Grace stared at the photograph. That's me. Yes. Who took it? I did. Grace looked at her. Are you? Natalie nodded. I'm your mother. Grace's face changed. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she asked, Why did you leave? Natalie swallowed. I didn't. But they said. I know. Grace looked toward her grandparents. Is that true? Nobody answered. Finally, Charles said, We made mistakes. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You told me she didn't want me. Natalie shook her head. I wanted you every day. Then why weren't you here? Because they made it impossible. Grace looked at the adults around her. For the first time, she realized that the story she had been told might not be true. Natalie didn't ask her to choose sides. She didn't insult her family. She simply said, You don't have to decide anything tonight. Grace stared at her. Are you really my mother? Natalie nodded. Yes. Grace took a hesitant step forward. Then another. Finally, she reached Natalie. Natalie knelt. Grace wrapped her arms around her. Natalie closed her eyes. 8 years of waiting disappeared in one moment. She didn't care about the business. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about Charles. She had her daughter in her arms. That was enough. The investigation continued after the gala. The evidence was reviewed. The guardianship agreement was challenged. The old records were examined. The truth eventually became undeniable. Natalie had never voluntarily abandoned Grace. She had been manipulated. Her family had used wealth and influence to control the situation. The consequences were severe. Adrian lost his position. Several family business arrangements were dissolved. Charles stepped away from the company. Diane finally admitted that she had known more than she had said. But Natalie refused to celebrate their downfall. She had spent too many years dreaming about revenge. Now she realized revenge had changed meaning. She didn't need to destroy them. She simply needed to make sure they could never control her again. Grace began spending more time with Natalie. Their relationship wasn't instantly perfect. There were difficult questions. There were tears. There were awkward moments. Grace had grown up without her. Natalie couldn't erase those years. But she could be there now. She could listen. She could answer. She could show Grace that she had never stopped loving her. One evening, they sat together in Natalie's apartment. Grace looked at an old photograph. You really kept this all these years? Natalie smiled. Every day. Grace touched the photograph. Why didn't you give up? Natalie thought about it. Because giving up would have meant believing they were right about me. Grace looked at her. And they weren't. No. Grace smiled. You're really my mom. Natalie laughed through tears. Yes. Grace leaned against her shoulder. For the first time, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She had spent years thinking about the moment she would return. She had imagined walking into the Brooks mansion. She had imagined confronting her father. She had imagined exposing everyone. But the real victory was much quieter. It was sitting beside her daughter. It was hearing Grace laugh. It was knowing that the lie had finally ended. Years earlier, Natalie had left her family's world with nothing. They believed they had taken everything from her. They had been wrong. They had taken her comfort. They had taken years with her daughter. They had taken her trust. But they had not taken her determination. And they had certainly not taken her future. Natalie had built that herself. One difficult day at a time. One small business deal at a time. One failure at a time. One promise at a time. The woman who returned years later wasn't the frightened pregnant woman they remembered. She was stronger. She was independent. She was successful. And most importantly, she no longer needed their approval. Her father had once believed money gave him the right to decide her future. Now he understood something he had never considered. Money can buy lawyers, can buy influence, can buy powerful friends, but it cannot buy back the years someone has lost, cannot erase the truth, and it cannot stop someone who has finally learned to stand on her own. Natalie didn't return to destroy her family. She returned to reclaim her story. And when Grace finally called her Mom, without hesitation, Natalie knew she had already won. Not because the Brooks empire had fallen. Not because her father had lost his power. Not because she had become wealthy. She had won because the little girl she had been forced to leave behind finally knew the truth. That was all Natalie had wanted. One final evening, mother and daughter stood together on the balcony of Natalie's apartment. The city lights stretched into the distance. Grace looked at her. "Do you regret anything?" Natalie thought carefully. "I regret losing so much time with you." Grace took her hand. "But we're together now." Natalie smiled. "Yes." Grace leaned against her. "That's what matters." Natalie looked out over the city. Years ago, she had stood in an empty apartment, believing her life was over. Now she stood beside the daughter she had fought for, knowing that her life had only been beginning. The family that had betrayed her had expected her to disappear. Instead, she had returned stronger than anyone imagined. They thought they had taken her future. They had only given her a reason to build one. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's becoming so strong, so independent, and so happy that they no longer have any power over you. Natalie squeezed Grace's hand. "I told you I'd come back." Grace smiled. "And you did." The city continued glowing beneath them. For the first time in years, Natalie wasn't looking backward. She was looking forward. And this time, nobody else would decide where her story ended.